Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Roadmaster Smart Diodes on a 2021 Jeep Wrangler 4xe. Now, when it comes to flat towing any vehicle these days, long gone are going to be the magnetic tow lights. It's rare that you see them, and for good reason. Most vehicles aren't magnetic anymore, so you're finding it's hard to find a spot to get those mounted up. You're also draping a wire, which is just one more thing that you have to store. And a lot of braking systems, as far as fixed ones, you're going to be tying into diode wiring. So really the best way to get the light signals to your factory taillights is going to be picking up the Smart Diode wiring kit. And the Smart Diodes are just essentially for LED taillights or Jeeps with ParkSense, and that's because it's variable voltage. So the Smart Diodes account for that and make sure that they light up accordingly. So if you do have that ParkSense feature on the center console of your Jeep, you are going to want to pick up those Smart Diodes. Now, something to keep in mind too, some of them have an incandescent bulb that still requires that Smart Diode feature. If that's the case, there is the Smart Diode for incandescent bulbs that you can pick up. But if you do have that ParkSense, you are going to want Smart Diodes regardless. Now, when it comes to flat towing any vehicle, there's going to be 5 main components that are going to be required, and sometimes there's going to be some other auxiliary things that you'll have to add in, but let's just take a look at the basics. The first thing is going to be the base plate, and that's going to structurally attach to the frame of the vehicle, creating a mounting point for your tow bar to be able to attach to. A tow bar is going to be the connection point between the base plate and the hitch on the RV. Now, just like towing a trailer, we have safety cables. That way, in case of an accidental disconnect, it's going to hold everything together and the vehicle is not going to be loose rolling down the road. We also have our diode wiring, which is going to transmit the light signals from the coach to the taillights on the towed vehicle, and that way you stay safe, giving you your running lights, turn signals, and brake lights. A lot of braking systems will also tie into diode wiring, so that is definitely something that I recommend everyone get. On our braking system today, we have this air coil, so you may not have that, but with all braking systems, you're going to have a breakaway switch, and that's in case of a catastrophic disconnect. If everything was to fail, it's going to pull this cable and bring the towed vehicle to a slow and eventually a stop, and that way it's not rolling down the highway. Essentially, adding diodes to your vehicle is just going to be like adding lights to a trailer. And just like a trailer, you need to make sure that you have all the wiring going up to the front to a connecting plug. And most of the times you're going to find that a 6-pole is going to be on the front of the towed vehicle, and the umbilical will jump between that and the 7-pole. And that's going to send the light signals eventually back to the taillights, where we tied in our diodes, and that's going to mimic the running lights, turn signals, and brake lights. So overall, the installation is actually pretty easy to do. Hardest part is going to be routing those wires back to the taillights and then splicing in, but I'll walk you through to make sure you get yours installed. So let's take a look at that. To get diode wiring installed on your Jeep is relatively easy. The hardest part generally is going to be just routing wires to the locations they need to be, which in our case is going to be the taillights. And so the first thing I recommend doing is, if you have your base plate already installed, you're already kind of looking all right there, but you need to come up with the mounting point of where you're going to put your 6-pole. So we have the Roadmaster base plate. It's a really nice kit. And they come with a bracket specific for the Wranglers that makes it really easy to mount this up. And that way we have a spot for our 6-pole. And I just went ahead and drilled a hole through the plastics rock guard here to run our wires through. So with this mounted up, I just tape an extra length of wire. That way we can attach that to our plug. You're going to want to leave a little bit of extra. That way you're not having to attach wires in a tight spot. So with this in place, taped up, I'm going to start routing our wires. And depending on the braking system that you have, sometimes you need to tie into the diode wiring. So pulling it up into the engine bay is definitely something that you're going to want to do in that case. So your stay and play duo, for instance, is definitely one you're going to want to pull that slack up. So I'm also going to follow that same path, and we're going to ground our white wire once we get up there. But for now, I'm going to just start routing this, and then I'll show you the path that I took. Pulling our diode wiring up in the engine bay, we want to make sure that we stay away from a lot of the moving parts, obviously, in the engine bay. So kind of wrapping this through some of the factory wires that we have, hard lines, whatever, to kind of keep that away is going to be key. So I have it pulled up here, and we need to attach a ring terminal to a factory ground. There's one that's located kind of tucked back here. There's going to be just a rubber cap on there, but I like to use this ground. It's pretty accessible, and we'll be going through the firewall later. So to just have everything kind of in place here, is a good spot. So with the 10 millimeter, I'm going to go ahead and get the nut removed first. Now it may have paint on it, so it might take a little bit to get this loosened up, but having a factory stud is really nice. Trying to keep all your grounds in one spot throughout your whole flat toe install is not 100% necessary, but it definitely helps. That way if you do have any grounding issues, you can just go back to that one location and just kind of keep it a little bit more simple. At this point, since we do need to run our ground to that post, we're going to go to the end of our diode wiring. And we're going to peel back the white wire until we get it to where it can route over to that post. And this is going to do two things. Obviously, we're going to be grounding the wire, but also that excess wire that we pull off, we can use that later on as a jumper for our running lights as we get to the back, as we need to go to both sides. So this is a great way to make sure that you have enough wire, and that way you don't have to go and get any extra. So just a small snip, you should be able to kind of peel this back. So once you determine that you have enough length to run it, we'll just go ahead, we'll snip off this end and then hold on to the excess white wire for later. And the ring terminal that's included in the kit, it's a pretty small diameter opening, so it probably won't go on that stud. So I just picked up a larger gauge or a larger diameter ring terminal to accomplish this, and we'll get this crimped on. And anytime you make electrical connections, whether it be a ring terminal or a butt connector or spade terminal, just once you crimp it down, give it a quick tug. That way you know it's properly crimped down. There's been plenty of times that I think I have it crimped and then I go to pull it and it slips off. And we want to make sure that we don't have to go back and track any of those loose wires. So with that crimped on, I'll just attach this to our ground stud and then get that nut put back in place. So once we get this tightened down, the rest of our wire, we're just going to route this down near the firewall again, trying to make sure that we're not catching any suspension or exhaust or anything like that. And then from here, we're just going to route this back to make our way to the taillights. So I'll get that all zip tied up and kind of ran back there and then show you exactly how I did it. Now after feeding the wires down the firewall, we'll find that on our driver's side frame rail, we have some wire loom here that's going to make for a good spot to zip tie this up. So you can see I just zip tied along here and then just followed it along for a little bit until coming to this cross member. And the reason being is the exhaust shoots all the way back, and just trying to avoid that. That way it's not going to melt the wires. I think this is a good spot, and eventually we need to split off. So I zip tied this up, made my way to this center bracket, and then continued on. Now, since this is a 4XE, we found our batteries here. I just ran the wires through this cover that we have here and then made my way back. And once we're here, obviously we have our rear axle, and the exhaust also goes up and over that axle. So trying to make sure that we have a safe path, I just went straight up before splitting our wire. So I have my green wire that's going to run over to the passenger side, and our brown and yellow is going to go over to the driver's side. So that's split off here. And just along the rear portion of this frame, I ran my green wire over, and there's a hole in the spring perch that you can zip tie that up. And then there's also holes in the frame that I zip tied it through. It's right out above the sway bar. And from there, I just went over to our taillight pocket where eventually we're going to run that up. Now, you'll also see I have this white wire. That's that excess that we cut off. And that just runs along, right where the rear hitch mount would be. There's some wires that you can zip tie that up to, so that's why you see these here. And I got that to the other pocket. Now, kind of backtracking with our yellow and brown, that's in our taillight pocket. I went up to those same holes that I zip tied up on the other side. You can just see those two there. I curled the zip tie that up. And then at this point, I actually went and used the heat shield to hold that up in place. There's not a whole lot of great spots there. And then that just goes back to where we split off. Now obviously to tie our diodes in, we're going to need to tap into taillight wiring, and that's going to require taking our taillights out. On Wranglers, very easy. You're just going to open up the rear door and hatch, and that way you can gain access to a plastic panel. And this cap right here is what we're looking for. There's a slot in the front side that you can just pry up on with a flathead screwdriver, and this will pop out. And there's going to be a plastic nut that's back here. It's actually a spring-loaded bolt, I should say. And you can attack this two different ways, but the best way I've found is a 10mm socket. I do believe it's also a Torx bit if you want to get to it that way, but 10mm should do it. And you don't need to remove this completely. Once it's threaded out, you can just leave this in place, and then our taillight should come out very easily. And we're going to separate our plug from our taillight. That way we can kind of work on our wiring here. So first thing, pull back this red tab, pinch down or push on this, and we should get this to separate. And some of these Jeep factory connectors are kind of tight, so just take your time here. There we go. And you'll see that there's going to be a plastic push pin that attaches our harness to the light. You can take a trim panel tool and just pry that off. And then we can set our taillight inside the vehicle. And you'll find that the wires are wrapped in this insulation tape, and we're going to split this and kind of peel this back to gain access to our wires. Normally I'll go, I would say probably to 6 inches, maybe a little bit more back. The main thing is we don't want those diodes too close to the plug. Sometimes you can run into clearance issues and a little bit of wire strain, so it's generally better to go a little bit further back. And if you're very careful, just cut this back. If you can peel it back, that's a great option too. It's not so easy sometimes, but once you kind of get a piece kind of cut back, just obviously make sure you're not cutting your wires, then you can generally unravel it. And with this peeled back, we're going to be looking for our yellow wire. And this is going to be for our car brake in and out. So it's going to use the car brake signal, and this is going to go directly to our diode. So first things first, we'll cut this. We're then just going to strip back about a ½ inch or so on your wires. And then you're going to want to grab your diode, and we're going to pull off 2 spade connectors, doesn't matter which one. But I'm going to go ahead and do the car in and out because that's what we're going to be attaching it to. So first things first, we'll get the spade connector crimped down on our wire. And just twist up your wire so it feeds in there a little bit better. It's also going to help bite onto our spade connector. And just as before, once you make that crimp, just give it a slight tug to make sure it's not going to come off. And then we'll get the other side also spade connected up. And then we'll take our diode. Car out is going to go towards the plug. Car in is going to be, obviously, that corresponding yellow wire. And at this point, we can pull off the other spade connectors because we'll be attaching those to our wires here shortly. Which brings me to our next step, which is going to be pulling up the wires that we ran to the back taillight pocket. Jeeps are pretty easy. You can actually kind of see, I can reach down here and almost pass the wires up to myself. If you want to make it a little bit easier, you can use a fish wire technique. So you can just feed this down until it pokes out from the bottom, and then we can tape up our wires, and that should make it a lot easier to pull them up. Now we obviously have tons of excess wire, which is okay. I'm just going to cut this though, less to feed up there. And then where we fed down our pull wire, just tape this up. And then we can pull that through. So we'll start with our yellow wire first, and we're just going to peel this back a little bit. I still have some excess here. So I'll cut that off, and then we'll strip this back, and we'll get our spade terminal on. And we're just going to attach this to RV brake in. So that's going to be taking that left turn signal and brake signal from our 6-pole through the umbilical and sending it through here. So that leaves us with RV tail in and ground. So our running lights are going to be that tail, and that white's going to be our jumper. So what we need to do here is I'm going to cut both of these back and strip back both ends. And we're going to take the yellow butt connector included in our kit, and we're going to tie these together. And with just a little bit of extra length from the wire that we cut with our white, we'll just strip this back, and we'll make this one wire now. And that is a larger gauge butt connector that's meant obviously for 2 wires. So what I recommend doing for the single is twisting up your wires and then bending it over. It's going to give it a little bit more bite to be able to crimp down a little bit better. Now with this placed, I have this little wire. We're going to put that on the RV tail in. And that just leaves one more connection to be made on this side, and that's where we're going to grab the small white wire from our kit. And this is just a ground, so what I'm going to do first is get a ring terminal placed on one side, and then we're just going to self-tap that into the metal of the Jeep. That way we can get a chassis ground, and then we can make that connection. And with the self-tapping screw, we're going to get this mounted in here. Now, if you need to, you can do a little pilot hole with a drill bit. Just make sure it's obviously smaller than the self-tapper. And when putting this in place, you just want to make sure that it's tight enough to where the ring terminal is not spinning around. Any tighter than that, you're going to run the risk of stripping out the holes that you just made. So just kind of snug that in. Don't go any crazier than that. And then we'll just plug in our ground wire. And at this point, we've pretty much accomplished our driver's side. So what I like to do is just kind of tape everything up, and that way it's going to keep it a little bit more protected and prevent any of these from popping out and putting strain on the wires. So I'll go ahead, get that all cleaned up, and then we'll head over to the other side. On the passenger side, I went ahead, got the taillight taken out, and pulled up our green and white wire. It's going to be pretty similar here, but our wire color does change. So for the car out and car in, or that factory wire that we spliced into, we use this green color. Now, something else that I'll point out is there's actually 2 other green wires. One of them has a white stripe. This is more of a lime green. We're going to want the slightly thicker gauge, darker green wire. So I just went ahead, made that attachment to the car in, car out. RV tail is going to be that running light wire, or that white wire that we jumpered over. Our ground, I just mounted that up. And then we have our RV break-in, which is going to be our green wire. Now, when getting this one in place, you got to take a little bit more time, because when you close your hatch, if you've never had your taillight out before, you can see the swing arm comes into play, and we want to make sure it's not going to be hitting, obviously, any of our wires. So there is a double-sided adhesive on the back of the diode, so if you want, you can stick that onto the bare metal, and then with the wires, I just try to zip tie it up to this factory wire, and that way it stays out of the way when we get our taillight put back in place. So I'll go ahead, I'll get this all taped up, put our taillight back in, we'll head up front, we'll get our 6-pole installed, and then we'll be good to go. Now, getting your 6-pole attached is super easy. If you are doing a charge line on your vehicle, now would also be the time to at least have your wire ready, because it's going to tap into this as well. The first thing we're going to want to do is grab the 6-pole and grab the boot, take that off, and you can slide this up the wires, and then we'll just feed this over. And if you have excess, no worries, because we can get this attached and just zip tie any extra up there. And that way, if your plug ever goes bad, you'll have a little bit room to play with those wires. You can cut those and start fresh. So don't cut yourself too short when it comes to the wires. On the back, we're essentially just going to be putting those wires into each of these little terminals, and it's just a Phillips head screwdriver to back these out. And as we back them out, don't remove them all the way. These are real small, and if they fall out, it is a bear to find them. but pretty easy. There's going to be molded in letters that will tell us exactly where the wires need to go, and they're going to correlate with the colors on our wires here. What we'll do first is just split our wires up. And then we'll strip back, say about 1/4 of an inch. You don't have to get too crazy here. And then we'll start at our 12 o'clock position. So on ours, it's marked TM. That's going to be tail marker. So I'll back that out. And we're going to put our brown wire there. And then when tightening it down, you'll get a little resistance, and that should be, don't go too crazy here. You run the risk of stripping that out and also damaging the wires, but it should be able to support itself. Next, we'll move over to GD, which is our ground. So that'll be our white wire. And going to the next one is LT, which is left turn, which will be yellow. And then finally, RT is going to be our right turn, so we'll get that one in place as well. Now, completely up to you, but something that we like to do is put a little bit of RTV silicone and just kind of coat up all the ends. And the reason being is this lives on the front of your vehicle, so anything that you're driving through has the potential to get your connections exposed to corrosion, and kind of coating that all up with an RTV silicone makes it to where that water can't penetrate in and break that down. So you can go ahead and just cover up your terminals with your RTV silicone. Now you can take your boot and slide that over, and I'll take some electrical tape and just tape this together just to kind of make sure that it's going to stay in place and also just add to that water resistance. And then something else that you can choose to do, I'm going to backfill this with RTV real quick, that's up to you as well, but putting wire loom in place is a great way to kind of clean up the wires to make it look a little bit cleaner. And also kind of seal this up a little better. So what I'm going to do is just take a small length of this wire loom. And we'll route this up. And then to feed it in the boot, you're just going to pinch the ends together. And make this a slightly smaller diameter. And then feed it in, and then I'm going to continue to tape around it. So just feeding that in and then wrapping it around with tape again just kind of helps protect this. And at this point, we'll go ahead and get it mounted up to our bracket, and then we'll test to make sure that it's working before hitting the road. So to test our diodes, we're going to be hooking up to a test box, which is simulating being an RV. So the way that you can do this is have your RV ready, plug in your umbilical, and then have someone take a look at the taillights on the towed vehicle as you run through the signals on your RV, and all the lights should transmit. So we'll be checking our running lights, our turn signals, and our brake lights. So starting with our running lights, we'll then go to our left turn signal, our right turn signal, and then finally our brakes. And that was a look at installation of the Roadmaster Smart Diodes on a 2021 Jeep Wrangler 4xe.